Hello, I'm Simon. Welcome back to the workshop. Now you've caught me making some of these everyday carry slim wallets, which are very tactile, for my friends. Now this isn't the subject of this video, so I'll leave a link to how I made these slim wallets out of simple veneer in the description below. Today's video is about making a mahogany bowl. I'm going to make this mahogany bowl out of this sheet of mahogany. This is an old piece of wall panelling. It's probably about 100 years old. It's very flat and straight, but the surfaces are going to need a little bit of attention. Let's get tinkering. The first thing I need to do to this board is to sand both faces. It's pretty flat already, but the surfaces are slightly rough. Now I don't have a drum sander or a thicknesser, which would be ideal for this job, so I'm going to have to use my orbital sander. I'm going to use the bench cookies to hopefully stop it from moving around too much. I've only sanded it to 80 grit. The main thing was to try and get it reasonably smooth. It looks like one side had been planed and the other had just been rough cut, so it took quite a long time to get done, but it's now quite a nice surface. So this board has a little bit of a rebate here, so I'm just going to cut this off so I'll have a board that's the same thickness throughout and the same width throughout. And it's at times like these that I'm glad that I made this little forward feed table, because it gives me so much more support when pushing this through the blade. This probably isn't that obvious on the video, but there's a little crack here, so I want to try and avoid that. So I'm going to cut the end off here. There's also a little nail hole that I want to avoid just here where the pencil is. And there's another little nail hole here which I also want to avoid. So the first thing I'm going to do, using the sliding table, is just trim the end to remove that piece with the split. I can now chop a piece off, which I'll use later for the base of the bowl. I'm going to rip the remaining board into two pieces to make the sides. They need to be slightly smaller than half the size of this board so that I can avoid the little nail blemish that I've got on one edge. If you like watching ordinary people with ordinary skills making stuff, then explore my channel to see other projects. The sides will splay out at 45 degrees to the base, so the first thing I need to do is to put a bevel on these two pieces. I now need to flip the wood over and put a bevel on the other side. I now have 8 compound mitre cuts to make. These cuts will make or break the project. I've never done this before, so I might not end up with a bowl at the end of it. I might just end up with some lessons learnt. Keep watching to find out which. Now I'm a bit disappointed I can't make this beveled mitre cut on the table saw. I was able to make the other one no problem, but at this angle it's just not possible to do it safely. So I've had to resort to using my Evolution mitre saw, which is a bit of a dog. I've put a new blade in it, which makes a massive difference, but it's not the most accurate machine in the world, so I think this could be the cut that breaks this project. Also, once I've actually made this cut, I think I can probably trim it up on the table saw. It's just I've got too much overhanging and too little support with it as it is, which won't be the case once it's cut. Well, geometry's a funny thing. I should have spent more time listening in school. I assumed that if I'd made a 45-degree angle there and a 45-degree angle there, then when these come together, they would form a 90-degree angle here. But they don't. They actually form a 60-degree angle. So I think this slope and this slope are correct, but what's wrong is this slope. But I don't know what that angle needs to be. So I was looking for something like that. Obviously that's not going to work with the big hole in the corners. So this has to be a shallower angle. You know, perhaps it's 60 degrees or 30, depending on what what side you actually measure it from, but I'm not sure, so I'm going to have to look it up and see if I can find out what the correct angle should be. I guess a lot of you watching this probably knew I was making this mistake. Well, why didn't you tell me? Okay, I was more than a little disappointed when I put these two bevels together and this angle here wasn't 90 degrees as I expected. I thought I had quite a good grasp on spatial awareness, but clearly I don't. I've now found a website that tells me the bevel angle and the angle here that I need to cut in order to get a four-sided bowl that's angled out at 45 degrees. So I'm going to follow those instructions and recut everything, and hopefully I can salvage a bowl from the pieces. The blade tilt needs to be 30 degrees from vertical, because the website assumes that 0 degrees is with the blade straight up cutting at 90 degrees. So with my measure set to 0 on the bed of the saw, that's a 60 degree tilt. So the mitre angle I need according to the website is 35.3, and that is measured with being a perpendicular cut straight through being 0 degrees. So I need the complement of that, which is 90 degrees minus 35.3, which is 54.7. Move this to what should be 90 degrees. It says 90.2. 90 degrees, that's it. I need to change this to 54.7. So the blade tilted to 30 degrees and the mitre angle at 35.3 degrees. I'm now ready to make my cuts. And now adjust the mitre to the complementary angle. I don't think this is necessarily the best way of doing this, so please don't copy this. This is within my threshold of risk, but I do think it is probably a little bit risky. I know I should use a mitre saw for this cut really, but my Evolution mitre saw just isn't accurate enough, and the angles that it cuts just aren't repeatable, and I can't really afford to spend out for a decent mitre saw just yet. The next problem I've given myself is clamping it all, so I'm going to try using just some masking tape, known in some countries as painter's tape. So I'm pretty pleased with the dry fit. There are some small gaps, but they're no thicker than a piece of paper, so I think that they'll all glue nicely once I get the glue in. So I now need to take it apart, add the glue, and then tape it all back together. I sprinkle the corners with a little bit of mahogany sawdust to fill in any tiny gaps that there might be. I now need to cut the bottom. Now, because it may not be 100% square, it's pretty square, but I think it's probably slightly out. What I'm going to do is just draw around the shape that I need to cut, and then I'll cut that on the table saw. Now, to ensure that I cut this exactly right, I'm going to use my pattern making jig, which I've got a video on, and I will double-sided tape this where I've struck the line, and then once it's taped on, I'll be able to move this jig along here like this, and this surface here will be in line with the blade, so that it basically cuts flush with the line that I've scribed. I'll then take this off, do the same thing again, and I'll repeat that 4 times to get this shape. This is one of those operations that can't be done with a riving knife in. So with the blade flush with the pattern jig surface, I can now cut this piece exactly on the line. I can now glue the base in. Whenever I do any hand sanding, I collect the sawdust and put it in these little pots, nicely labelled, so that if I ever need to make up a little bit of wood filler, I can choose the right tone. Clamping the sanding block to the bench means I can take full advantage of the weight of the bench, making it easier to sand. I now use my oscillating multi-tool with a sanding head and various grits to sand the inside of the bowl. And before applying finish, I give it a good wipe down with the tack cloths to remove all the little dust motes. I now add several layers of Danish oil, which I've read is food safe. Well, this has been a really interesting project. I've learnt so much making this bowl that I'm sure that if I was to make it again, I'll do an even better job. I think if I look to make a number of these bowls, which I'm not currently thinking of doing, then I would certainly start by making a jig so I could get all of those compound cuts perfect. I think another change that I would make is, rather than having square sides on the base unit, I would have them mitered so that it's slotted in, because I think that would help to reduce any gaps and so on that you might get when you're cutting things out. As it is, it worked out okay and I'm very happy with it. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, and if you've got this far, then please hit that thumbs up. It makes a great deal of difference, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.